I thought I'd go over something today that just connects several of the subjects that I've been talking about recently, both in these YouTube videos and on the podcast. And so I apologize if I'm rambling. As most of you know, when I do these car videos, I often ramble, but you can connect the pieces, especially if you're familiar with the stuff we're talking about. So, a few weeks ago, I made a video just saying that there's really, in all my years, in my like 8 or 9 years of studying and trying to apply LOA principles into my life, there's really only two things that I've always been able to fall back on, quote unquote techniques. And one was just the general Neville idea, like I guess really what you would call the law of assumption, to assume the best and assume that either you're moving in the right direction towards what you want, or that you already actually are what you want, that you already have it. So just that idea of assumption, that was a very profound uh, you know subject, or concept for me when I first discovered it. And I had heard about it prior, via self-improvement books and stuff like that, like Tony Robbins style, like assume you want to be the person you are. But like when I read Neville talking about it for the first time, and then after, when I continued to read Neville and study and try to apply his advice, it took on a whole new meaning, obviously, as it probably has for most of you. Neville is so darn serious talking about if you assume something, it will happen. Um, that was really like the one of two main LOA takeaways that just really has always worked well for me, and it helped improve my life in so many ways. It's just that idea of really assuming something, to the best of your abilities. And obviously, there's many different ways to assume things. And then the second thing I said I relied on, that I really got from LOA, is this idea of just like kind of vibing out, in that state where everything is okay. Like, Emmett Fox describes the golden key as, instead of thinking of your troubles, think of God instead. Um, and, people use this different terms to describe this. Joseph Murphy says the absolute method. H. Emily Cady says trustful passivity. Richard Dotz talks about going into almost like this, very neutral type of void. But anyway, this place, mentally, imaginatively, mind, body wise, where like you're at peace with everything, and you're just kind of like in touch with the absolute because of that. That also is a state, and I use that term loosely, not firmly. Like that's a state of mind, or a state of being that's just very conducive to manifesting more of what you want in your life. Like in Dissolve the Problem, Richard Dotz says, you basically want to soften your insistence on the stress and the state that you currently are living in. If you feel stressed out, shift to this more open state, this more neutral and free state, and then you want to stay there as much of the time as you want. You know, um, I call it, Murphy called it the absolute method. I like that. It's just falling into God. So that's the other thing that really LOA showed me that I never really had been that aware of before, as like as a practice to improve your life. That simply by being with God, vibing out in that, just that nothingness and allness, your life does improve externally just by doing that. One thing I did not say that I relied on as an LOA technique is talking out loud. And the reason I didn't mention talking out loud is because I don't really consider that an LOA technique, although obviously it can be used as an LOA technique. Talking out loud is something I always like to do, and I actually have gotten much more into it, since I got into the law of attraction. So maybe I should have included that in. And talking out loud is just like a fantastic device, whether we're talking about the law of attraction, just talking about stress management, talking about self-improvement, talking about whatever. Talking out loud is so helpful. And I've discussed this in many different places. And one reason that I like Coué so much is, even though he's not necessarily teaching about talking out loud in like a very loose way, the way that I often do to myself, is I just talk out loud very loosely to myself. But obviously, Kuwei's discussing talking out loud. That's what autosuggestion is suggesting things to yourself out loud by like whispering and being calm. But also just what you say to yourself, what you're auto-suggesting to yourself, right? And so instead of, often we have this voice in our head that's auto-suggesting stuff to ourselves, right? And it seems like it's overwhelming us. But when we start to talk out loud, whether it's in a calm, gentle way before bed, like, Kuwei suggests via autosuggestion, doing his method, or whether it's just talking out loud during the day to ourselves, we can neutralize that negative inner voice by doing that, This is like super, super profound. So I rely on that too. I mean, without question, like talking out loud. I just don't consider it like an LOA device exclusively. I think it's more of just like an overall wonderful device that basically everybody should use. You should talk out loud to yourself regularly in whatever way you like. There's no one way to talk out loud to yourself. But if you do it in a way where your subconscious or imagination believes what you're saying, which I personally have found to be very easy for my subconscious to accept what I'm saying if I'm speaking out loud to myself, then you should do it, because that's effective. That's an effective way to improve your life. Personally, I just find that like when I'm in a meditative state, like vibing out or whatever, like I don't want to talk out loud to myself because I'm very quiet and still. But like when I feel agitated or when I'm just going through my day, I'm pushing, for instance, my daughter in the stroller yesterday, and it's just the two of us, and she's crying, and I'm trying to calm her down, and then she's crying again, and then she's falling asleep. I started talking out loud to myself. I wasn't like talking in my head trying to calm myself down. Initially, I was, just to be like chill while we're walking and just beautiful neighborhood and just taking it easy. There's no need to be stressed there. But when I was trying to convince myself of that, just inwardly and not talking out loud, it was somewhat hard to do. When I started talking out loud, saying, this is great, everything's fine, all this stuff running through my head is just an illusion, this is reality right here, right now, what we're doing walking. When I started talking out loud to myself, all of a sudden my imagination accepted that very, very easily. The difference was I spoke out loud, and my subconscious was able to accept my suggestions much more easily than when I was just saying them in my head. That inner negativity cannot counteract it as effectively when my out loud voice was strongly speaking. So I wanted to read something from Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion quickly that Kuwei says that relates to all this. I've made a couple recent episodes on the podcast about Kuwei. If you're new to this channel, I've seen some comments, people saying, this is great, this is so informative. And it is great and informative, just because Kuwei is great and informative. But if you're new to this channel, you can go back and listen to a lot of earlier episodes of the podcast as well, because I talk about Kuwei all the time. I usually talk about Kuwei once every 5 episodes or more often. So yeah, let me read this quick quote. Someone asked Kuwei, how can we realize what we desire? And Kuwei said, by repeating often what you desire. For instance, I am gaining poise, and you will. My memory improves, and it certainly will improve. I am able to control myself absolutely, and there is no question that you will. Again, this is not that complicated, right? This is not like esoteric visualization or something like that. The person asked, how can we realize what we desire? And Kuwei said, by repeating often what you desire. Kuwei went on to say, if you tell yourself the contrary, it is the contrary which is going to happen. And that's what often occurs, is that we affirm something we want, but then that quiet voice in our head says, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. And we believe that quiet voice instead of that affirmation. But the contrary voice is that negative voice. But the affirmative voice, that what you want, can override that by talking out loud. Okay, so that's very important. Coué says, what you tell yourself persistently and very rapidly comes to pass, provided, of course, that it is something natural. So I rambled a little bit here, but it should be clear. Talk out loud to yourself. Experiment with it. It is fun to do. It's enjoyable. And, I often say that it can get you out of most mental issues that you're going through. Very, very powerful. Can't recommend it enough.